Okay, we're on Mem Hey Amud Beis at the bottom, at the Mishnah. Let's give another minute for people who are still coming.
Sorry if that was directed at you.
So Mem Hey Amud Beis at the bottom. Niftaru Ziknei Yerushalayim v'hochu lahen. After measuring to determine which town was obligated to bring the Egla Rufa, the elders of Yerushalayim, which meant the judges and of the Sanhedrin, took their leave and they went on their way. So they just did the measurements. Ziknei Osa Ha'ir Mevi'in Egla Bokor Asher Lo Moshcha Ba'ol. Then the elders of the judges of that particular town would continue, and they would bring the female calf of the cattle, and that had not had an oil a yoke, had not pulled with the yoke. With a yoke, the ein hamum posaba, and a blemish on this calf does not disqualify it for an egla arufa. Umaridin osan anachal esan, and they would bring it down to a son, the valley of Esan, and there's a question whether that's means a water, a riverbed, or whether it means just an Esan valley. Esan b'mashma, and the term Esan implies literal meaning. It suggests kosher, a hard or a rocky place. Afal pi she'eno Esan kosher, even if it's not a hard valley, it's still acceptable. If you did elsewhere, it's still good. The orphin oisa mekovitz mechareha, and they decapitate it with a cleaver from the back of its neck. Makoma osur melizroa umilavod, and its place. The place where the decapitation takes place, the Esan Valley, is forever prohibited to be planted or worked or used in a useful manner to produce something. Mutar lizrok sham pishtan, but it's permitted to comb flax there, unaker sham avonim, and to chisel stones there. Ziknei Asa'ir Rochatzin Es Yedehim B'Mayin. The elders of that town, those would wash their hands with water after they performed the ceremony. Bimkom Arifa Shel Egla, at the site where they decapitated the calf. Ve'omrim Yodenu Lo Shavchu Es Adam Hazeh Ve'nenu Lo Ra'u. And they say after they've done this, is our hands have not spilled this blood, and our eyes did not see. And it's said in Lashon HaKodesh. V'chi al da'atenu also sheziknei beisin shovchei damim hein. Now did it enter our minds that the elders of the court are spillers of blood, that they have to make such a disclaimer? Did they really think it was them who why this person died and brought the egla rufa? Ela shalo bo lo al ba'idenu fartunu. Rather, what it means that the person who was murdered, was found dead, did not come within our presence, and we weren't responsible for sending him off with no food. Nor did we see him and leave him and let him go on his way without having an escort go along with him.
Sorry, that's burial, right?
Sorry?
That's burial. Burialim.
Briolim?
And bones, no?
No, you can find his body. It doesn't have to be. We used to say measure from his navel sometimes, so it could be a fresh corpse. You don't know how long the person has been lying there for.
What do they do with the decapitated calf? Do they just leave it there?
Afterwards. Good question. I don't know.
And they clean in water.
They wash their hands.
What about bones? Not.
What they do with the person who died, they have to bury him. So they usually bury him on the spot, where it fell. Yeah, they usually bury him on the spot. The Kohanim Omrim. Nowadays we have cemeteries, but in those days they used to bury him right where they found him. The Kohanim Omrim, Kaper Lamcha Yisrael Asher Podis Hashem, atone for your people Israel that you redeemed Hashem. The Kohanim, if you remember, the Kohanim had to be there as well as the we learned previous Daf Yomi, as well as the Shoftim. Al titein dam naki v'kerev amcha Yisrael, and do not place innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel. And the Kohen did not have to say the concluding portion of this verse, which says, "Then the blood shall be atoned for them." Rather, these are the words of the divine spirit informing them that whenever you perform this rite, the blood of the murdered person will be atoned for them. What it's saying, he says the first part of the pasuk, and what it's meaning is that everybody understood that what's going to happen next. He didn't actually say those words. He's just telling them that the blood of the murdered person will be atoned by the fact of doing this egla rufa. So we talked about the Mishnah rule that a blemished calf is fit to use as an egla rufa. But let a blemish disqualify respect to egla rufa from falling kal v'chomer. So in other words, why do we say that an egla rufa doesn't could be have a mum on it? We could learn it out. We find concerning a por duma that even though age does not disqualify for it, there's no maximum age that it can be. Mum poselba. Nevertheless, we're talking about a poraduma now. So the poraduma, even though the age does not disqualify, there's no maximum age that the poraduma has to be. But mum poselba, but a mum does disqualify it. Egla sheshanim poselba. Then regarding an egla rufa, where age does disqualify it, it has to be less than a year old. So there's a maximum for it. So eino din shehei mum poselba. Is it not more logical that a mum should disqualify it? Shani Hosim, but so there's Gemara gives an answer. Shani Hosim, there it's different regarding mum. The Omar Kura Asher Ein Ba Mum, because of the pasuk says in Poraduma that it says a cow that's perfect, which has no blemish on it. The word it that it said that it, which has no blemish on it, the word it is limiting, which means that implies that posel bamum, only on it, the poraduma, does a blemish disqualified. Ve'ein mum posel begla, but a blemish that does not disqualify respect to egla rufa. So the it sort of defines, it means that it's only referring to a poraduma, and you shouldn't learn out for it for an egla rufa. Otherwise, you could use a kal v'chomer. But the word it comes to tell you not. But if so, that the word it is an exclusion that limits the law to the category which it was stated, other forms of work should not disqualify a cow for use as a pomaduma. So what it's saying is that we for the law that the other forms of work disqualify is stated explicitly only in regards to an egla rufa. So it's applied to paraduma by means of a kal v'chomer. So you're saying if you're going to learn from a paraduma, if you're going to try to learn from a paraduma to an egla rufa, you should be able to learn from an egla rufa to paraduma. For the law that other forms of work disqualify is stated explicitly only in regard to egla rufa, and is applied to paraduma by means of a kal v'chomer. So since the verse states this law in regards to egla rufa uses the term it for egla rufa, so therefore you should say, well, maybe this should only apply to egla rufa, and you shouldn't learn out that you can't work a paraduma. How do we know that a paraduma you're not allowed to work from? We learned it out from egla rufa. But egla rufa also says the word it. So if it says the word it for egla rufa, you should just say, well, maybe the work only applies to egla rufa and wouldn't apply to paraduma. And the same thing, just like a blemish applies to paraduma, we learn that out from the word it. So Alama Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Why did Rav Yehuda say to Amar Rav? Heiniach alea udon shel sakin. If one places a bundle of sacks on the cow, psula, it's disqualified for use as a pordumas. So in other words, if you use the porduma for some type of work, but with respect to egla rufa, the calf can still be used until it hauls a bundle. So there's a difference between the two. For egla rufa, it says the word, what we're going to see, it says the word yoke, it has to actually pull, where it actually has to do some work with the object. But for a poraduma, it says even if you just place something on it and the cow does not move with it or doesn't do any work with the cows with the sacks on it, it's disqualified. But for an egla rufa, it's only disqualified if he actually does some work with it. So what's the difference with it? Holding of a bundle should not disqualify a paraduma at all, if you're going to learn it out from each other. So that would be true. But we have a gezer shova. Shani pora, the paradum is different. Should the alfinon oil me'egla. But we derive its disqualification due to other forms of work from gezer shova between the word yoke found in the paraduma and yoke found in the egla rufa. So this teaches that just as other forms of work disqualify a calf from serving as an egla rufa, so too they disqualify a cow from serving as a paraduma. So he said normally you would think that the two its, that one of the it that says by pora duma would prevent the blemish, the learning out the blemish for egla rufa, that it doesn't have to be a blemish, and you would think that the it that it says regarding egla rufa would prevent you from learning out and carrying it over to paraduma that it shouldn't be considered disqualified until it actually does the work. And it says you would or any work at all. But it says by the fact that it has a gezer shova between the two of them, so now we disregard that it says it regarding egla rufa, and we can apply the same over to the paraduma. So egla nami tete all mipra. If so, then as regards to the law of egla rufa as well, let it be derived from the very same gezer shova between the word yoke in egla rufa and the yoke in the paraduma. So this should teach us just as blemishes, just like you want to disregard the it for egla rufa, but the fact that you have a gezer shova that says it says the word oil. So let's apply it the other way around too. Let's learn out the blemishes again to disregard the word it that it says in paraduma, and let's learn it out for egla rufa. Ha miyet rachmanaba. But the Gemara answers. But you would learn it out, but except it says it. The it from egla rufa is going to shrug it off and say no, you don't learn it out because it says it. It only applies to the egla to the paraduma, and it won't apply it back to egla rufa. The it actually shrugs it off. The egla nami kasiv bo, but in the egla rufa it also says the word it. So why do you and yet you allow the gezer shova to teach that the word qualifies to paraduma? So it says I don't understand. So you have gezer shova, you disregard it because the two its. Why are we not treating both derivations the same way? The Gemara answers, "Hahu mi borle lema'ate kadoshim." That limiting term in the verse of egla is needed to exclude. So it says that it that you're using for egla rufa, you can't use it to say that it's excluding that work shouldn't be done. You can't learn that whole segment out because that it is being used for something else, and because you're using the it for something else, you can't use it to exclude it for to learning it out for the paraduma. And what do you need it for? It needs to exclude kadoshim, sacrificial offerings, the low postel behu avoda, to teach that work does not disqualify animals from being used for them. So the it that it says by egla rufa, that the work that you're not allowed to do with it only applies to it, the egla rufa, and does not apply to kadoshim. You're allowed to, if somebody gives a korban and you use it for work, you're still allowed to use it as a korban. But for you might think to say that a disqualification should be derived by means of a kal v'chomer for egla rufa. This is ma egla she'ein mum posaba. If we find concerning an egla rufa that even though a blemish does not disqualify a calf from being used for it by negla rufa, avoda poselaba, nevertheless the work does disqualify it. So you would think kadoshim shemum posel, but kadoshim, which is more strict and has a blemish, if it has a blemish, it's no good. So for sure, eino din she'avda posel bahen. For sure, is it not logical that work would also disqualify it? So that's what you would think. So the it by egla rufa is coming to disqualify, to say that no, it doesn't apply to the egla rufa, but it's still, that it is not also used to disqualify the paraduma, so you still learn that paraduma you can't do work with it. So ikach lemifrach, but this kal v'chomer can be challenged on the following grounds. Ma le'egla shekain shonim posimba. What can you derive from egla rufa when the age when age disqualifies it? Because we said an egla rufa has to be less than a year old, but this does not disqualifying factor for kedoshim. So therefore, how can you learn something that's you can't learn something that's more strict, something that's less strict from something that's more strict? It only works the other way around. So the Gemara says no. Otu kedoshim mi leika posel b'ushonim. But there are no types of kedoshim that age disqualifies. Yes, there are. Yeah, korban pesach. Korban pesach has to be less than a year old, so it is also strict. So therefore, you can learn the kal v'chomer out, because therefore the egla roof is not more strict than what the object you're learning it out from, and therefore it still should apply. Ki de'itzrach kra lahonon. L'honach kadoshim l'pasla behu shonim. Thus, for what is limiting in the verse needed, what is it? What is the limiting term in the verse needed for? For those types of kedoshim, with that age does disqualify. So you can learn that out, and that's what the kal v'chomer would be for. So the kedoshim delo apostle behu avoda mehacham nafka. So therefore, you can say that the it is referring back to those kedoshim. We learned it out that those kedoshim, certainly if you did work with it, it's still good for korban. Kedoshim delo apostle behu avoda mehacham nafka. But it is the law that work does not disqualify kedoshim derived from this word if by egla rufa? No, we learned it from somewhere else. Mehosam nafka, rather it's derived from there by averis or shavuts or chorutz or yabelis or garavo. It says in a brisa yalach passes v'lo takrivu ela Lashem. The verse that prohibits blemishes in kedoshim states one that is blind or broken or with a split eyelid or a wart or a dry skin eruption or a moist skin eruption. You should not offer these to Hashem. Ela, it says this word Ela, these, Ela iato makriv. The verse implies it's only these animals you should not offer because they are blemished. Avol ato makriv kadoshim sheneva bahem avoda. But you may offer kadoshim which work was done for it. So you don't need the word it to teach us that. So then we say, well, then we should be able to still apply that back to paraduma, because that it is no longer needed for what you said it was for. So Gemara answers, Itzrich, no, we still need the word it of egla rufer for something else. It's needed to teach Salka Dachav Daitach Amina Hone Mile Hecha Da'avad Bahin Avodas Heter. For if you might think to say that this teaching of the Bryce applies only where one performed a permitted type of work with the animals, Avol Avoida Iser Ema Listara. But if you form forbidden work with them, you might say that you're not allowed to use it. So we could say the way we were thinking before, that yes, okay, you're right. So for a kedoshim, that if you did work on it, we can learn it out that that kedoshim is still good. But what happens if a person did work with the animal on Shabbos? Maybe under those circumstances, then that the korban would now become forbidden. So how do we know that it's not that type of work? So let's use therefore we need the word it to tell us that for that type of work, if it's forbidden work by a korban that's kodesh, it's still good for a korban. So honami mehachanafka, but this law permitting animals that perform forbidden work is also derived from the pasuk. There's another brayse that says, "Umiyad ben necher lo sakrivu et lechem alo hechem mikol ela," and from the hand of a stranger you may not offer the food of your God from any of these. Ela, gets that word ela again. What does it mean by ela? Ela iatomakr. The verse implies that only these blemished animals you're not allowed to offer. Avol atomakr kadoshim shenevda bahen avoda. But you may offer kadoshim with which work was done. Now we already learned that out once already. Now we're learning it out a second time that you can't. You can still do kadoshim where work was done. Why do you need it to say it twice? Since we have two sources about allowing korban kodesh to be kadoshim to be sacrificed. Therefore, one of them will be used for telling us that doing permitted work with a kadoshim does not disqualify it, and the second time would be referencing that even if you used it for doing forbidden work, it would still be good for a korban. Therefore, the it stated in Egla Rufa is still needed to teach that the work does not disqualify these animals for Kedoshim. For you might think to say that these statements of the previous price apply only where one worked with the animals, whether they're chulin. So they're saying, well, what? So they're coming out to. So what do we? So that it now is still a question mark. And I said, no, we still need it. We still need it. What happens if the animals were worked before they were designated as a korban? How do we know that that'd still be good afterwards to use as a korban? This is because the word it is going to help you with that. But if one worked with him when they became already, the other way around. So maybe we're talking about when they used the animals before they were designated as a korban, and then under those circumstances, that's what the psukim that just told us were about. But how do you know? Well, once they're already designated as a korban, and now at this point, if they're used for work, that it would still be good for a korban. It's still good. So it says that it by Egla Rufa is coming to tell us that under those circumstances it's still good. So we need the word it. So therefore, Sricha, we need the word it to tell us that it does not apply to these karbonos, and the it is not available to teach you that it shouldn't apply to the poraduma. So we have at the end, what we have is that, so we learn that the poraduma is not allowed to be used, any work to be done with it, from the connection with the Gzer Shava to Egla Rufa. Okay, so we're up to Gufa. Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav Heiniach Olea Udon Shel Sakin. If one places a bundle of sacks, empty bags, on the cow, Pasula, it is talking about the poraduma. It is disqualified for use as a poraduma. Uvegla at timshach. Yeah, but with regard to the Egla Rufa, that he would not be possible with it until it actually it moves, it carries those bags. There's a difference between the poraduma, and this is according to Rav, and the Egla Rufa. So basically, they asked a question on it. The oil, the verse that says in Poraduma passage stipulates that it be upon there's no yoke, no oil has been on it. Ein lo ela oil. From this, I know only that placing a yoke on a cow disqualifies it for use as a Poraduma. Sha'ar avodas minayin. From where do we know that other forms of work also disqualify a Poraduma? Amarta kal v'chomer. You can say it is derived from a kal v'chomer. If we find concerning an Egla Rufa that even though a blemish does not disqualify a calf from being used for it, Sha'ar avodas pesulabah, nevertheless other forms of work do disqualify it. Pora shemum shposabah, but then as regards to poraduma, where a blemish does disqualify a cow, eino din shashar avros posambah, is it not logical that other forms of work should also disqualify it? The im nashach lomer, and if you want to say learn out from someplace else because you're worried that the kal v'chomer can be refuted, it says learn it out nemar kon oil. It says here in the verse of Poraduma the word oil, v'nemar lahalan oil, and it says there the word by Egla Rufa it also says the word oil. So you have a gzer shova ma lahalan sha'or avodos posambah, just as there other by the Egla Rufa other forms of work disqualify the calf for being used. Afkan sha'or avodas posla. So here in by Paraduma, other forms of work can disqualify it. So now the Gemara is going to go back by the sentence. Why does it say if you want to say another answer? What was wrong with the kal v'chomer that you said you want to come up with a second answer? So ma im nafshech lomer, what is meant by if you wish to say another answer? V'chi tema ikal lemifrach, and if you'll say that this kal v'chomer, and if you can, so the Gemara is answering, but maybe you can say this kal v'chomer can be challenged on by the following reasoning. Ma la egla sheshkein shonin posaba. What can you derive from Egla Rufa when age disqualifies it, whereas age does not disqualify a paraduma? Alternatively, the law of Kedoshim demonstrates the fallacy of this kal v'chomer. So that's one reason that he said, well, I can't learn it out from the other because they're not exactly the same, because Paraduma has there's no age limit, but Egla Rufa there's an age limit. Alternatively, the law of Kedoshim demonstrates that this kal v'chomer doesn't work. Shemum posel behen, for a blemish disqualifies Kedoshim. The ein avoda posel behen, but yet work does not disqualify them. So So you can't use the kal v'chomer that we said that it says oil in both places sorry, you can't use the kal v'chomer that it's just because a mum is no good for an egla rufa. That, I mean, in other words, an egla rufa can have a mum on it, and therefore you can't use it, and you can't do work for it. So something that's more strict. So certainly you can do some work for it, and you want to use that to learn for the paraduma. But you say you can't learn that out because for carbonus, mum is no good for on a carbonus. Yet we can do work for it. So therefore, to use a kal v'chomer to say because of egla rufa, which doesn't have a mum in it, you can't do work for it. You can then extrapolate to everything else that's more strict, but it certainly doesn't apply for carbonus. So certainly you can't use it to apply to the paraduma as well, and therefore you have to use the gezer shova of oil for tshuva. Nemar kan oil, nemar nalon kol. It says the word yoke here, and it says the word yoke work there. Malahon shar avodos, just as there, other forms of work disqualify it. Avkan shar avodos. So too here, other forms of work disqualify it. So umimalkom shabosa, but from the very place that you came to derive the law, egla rufa. In other words, from using the gezer shova, that for egla rufa to apply to the paraduma, malahon ad chimshach, just as there, calf is still fit to use as an egla rufa until it hauls a bundle. So why don't you say the same thing? If you're going to both have gezer shova for egla rufa and paraduma, and you're learning it out that you can't do work for for paraduma from egla rufa, so why don't you learn out exactly the same way? And you said an egla rufa, even if you put a burden on it, it's not possible until it actually does the work. So why don't you say the same thing for paraduma? If you're going to compare everything together and bring one over to the other, then you should learn that idea as well, that for paraduma, it also shouldn't be possible until it actually pulls something with it. So why does Rav say that just placing a bundle, we said before, on a bag of sacks on top of the cow should disqualify the paraduma? So Tanoahi, so the answer is it's a machloikus. So Rav will hold one way, and other Tanoim will hold another way. So some people will hold that you're right, you should learn it exactly out the same way from a egla rufa to paraduma, that it wouldn't be possible until it actually does the work. And other people, like Rav, would hold that that it does disqualify it just by placing work on it. For while there are some Tanaim who derive this disqualification from egla rufa, it's not talking about Rav. There are some who derive it from the verse of paraduma itself, and that's where Rav will learn it out from. That's why, because he's not learning from the gezer shova, and therefore he doesn't apply the same exact rules for egla rufa to paraduma, but because he's learning out the reason why the paraduma can't do work, he learns out from a different pasuk entirely, not from the gezer shova. And according to these Tanoim, the law regarding paraduma is not limited by the law that applies to egla rufa. The Tanya for Bryce, then he learns it for Bryce. It says oil. The verse of a paraduma says upon which has come a yoke, ainly ella oil. From this I only know that placing a yoke on the cow disqualifies it. She'or avodas minayin. From where do we know that other forms of work disqualify a cow from uses of paraduma? Talmud Lomer, because it says asher lo ola ala oil. The Torah therefore says asher lo ola ala oil, that goes on it, that it states upon which has not come a yoke. So they use the word upon, mikol mokam, implying that the place of any burden whatsoever disqualifies it. Im kain ma talmud alomar oil. If so, that all forms of work make a cow unfit for use as a paraduma. So why does the Torah say a yoke? If it says which a yoke should not come on it, it says upon. So he's trying to say the upon which has not come a yoke. He says the word you should emphasize is upon, putting anything upon it. Don't worry about the word yokes. And I said, why is it saying yoke then? If upon is supposed to say anything, then why does it specify yoke? O posel bein b'shas avodas bein shelo b'shas avodah. To teach that a yoke disqualifies whether it's placed on a cow at a time of work or not at a time of work. So in other words, just putting a yoke on a cow, whether it's you just decided to put it there for a moment and he doesn't do any work with it, and then immediately take it off because he wants to fix his tie his shoe, then that would immediately make it puzzle. just putting it down for a moment. Or avodas ein postel ela b'shas avoda, whereas other forms of work disqualify cow only at the time of work. So that so it doesn't actually. So we see that except for a yoke, that the putting down on it only disqualifies it if it's possible for the animal to do work with it once you put it down on it, and that's the way that Rav would be holding. The ema asher lo ola aleh kolo, but say that the words. So now I was going to ask a question. So it looks like the way it's set up. It says ema, maybe the way that it says upon it, and then it says yoke. Maybe it's saying that the word upon, which is not constitutes a klal. An oil is a prat, and when it comes to say the oil, and it says yoke, is a prat, is a specification. We learned that when you have a generalization, when you have a generalization which says that you cannot put anything on it, and then it says yoke, we learned that only applies to whatever it says in the specification. So maybe it really only refers to if you put a yoke on it, that only a yoke you're not allowed to do work with, but any other type of work you would be able to do if you're going to explain it this way. A generation is followed by specification. A generation is understood to include only what is said in the specification, the prat. Oil ain midi achrin lo. Thus, we should derive that a yoke indeed disqualifies cows from being used, but other things are not. So the Gemara answers, but it also says the word asher. And asher ribuyahu. And asher is a ribui. And we learned also there's different ways of darshaning. You can use a klal of prat, and you can use a ribui me'at. And when it says asher ends up being a ribui. And whenever it says there's certain words, if it says together with a klal of prat, that those words are sort of stop words which prevent you from using the klal of prat. And one of those words is the word asher. So this says asher in the pasuk. It's an inclusive term which teaches that all forms of work disqualify the cow. Vitanya and a brisa nami gabi egla ki hai gavna, and a brisa also teaches a similar exposition regarding an egla rufa. It says oil. The verse of egla rufa says the word oil in it. Ainli ella oil. From this I only know that pulling a yoke disqualifies a calf. Sha'or avodas minayin. From where do we derive the other forms of so this is another Bryce is telling us the other forms of work also disqualify it. Talmud loyma asher lo ubadba. The Torah therefore states that which no work has been done. Mikol mokam, implying that any work whatsoever. Im kain ma Talmud loymer oil. And so why? So we just went through this with a different Bryce, and now we're doing the same thing. We're learning it out from another Bryce and going through the same thing again. So why it says, why does the Torah say specifically an oil? Oil posel bein b'shas avoda bein shalo b'shas avoda, to teach that a yoke disqualifies whether a calf is pulling at a time of work or not a time of work. Sha'or avodas ein posel el b'shas avoda, where other works disqualifies the calf only at the time of the work. So it says a yoke in any time, as we said before, and other objects is qualified only when they're put on it for the sake of having the calf carry it or work with them. So if he's not putting it down for that, if he's only putting it there for a second, and it wasn't the idea that it was supposed to do any work for it, then that we go back to what Rav said, therefore it would disqualify. But if he's putting it down with the intention of some time of doing some work, then that would disqualify it. The ema shalor ubad klal would say that the words which says asher lo ubad ba, which has no work has been done, it constitutes a klal. And no prat, no is a prat again. So we come back to the same question. Klal of prat ein maklal ela ma prat, and a klal of prat you can't followed by a klal that it comes to include only what it says in the prat, which is the oil. Oil ein midei achrin lo. Thus we should derive that pulling a yoke would disqualify it, but other things it would not. The Gemara answers again the same answer as it gave before. It says the word asher there as well, and it says asher ribuhu, and the word asher comes to say that no, that you can't use this klal of prat, that it includes any type of objects that are placed on it would be for you can use for work.
You couldn't use a leash, or like for if you want to lead just for a leash, that's not considered an oil.
I'm not sure what the strict definition of an oil would be. It's going to say later on it has to be at least a tefach, but I don't. Maybe that's that particular type of oil. Maybe there's all different kinds, and whether a leash constitutes an oil or not, I don't know.
That's might be so weak that you wouldn't be able to, wouldn't do.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how they.
I don't know.
That's a question. I don't know. Omer Rabbi Abayu, Ba'imine mi Rabbi Yochanan. They had. I inquired of Rabbi Yochanan. Mishiv chas oil but makama. Disqualification resulting from pulling yoke is for how much? How far must the calf pull the yoke to become disqualified for use as an egla rufa? Omar li kimlo oil, and he said to me, a distance equivalent to the size of a yoke. Okay, so this I was saying, this could be part of your answer. Iboilahu, they inquired, la'orcha or la'rachbar, was it Rabbi Yochanan referring to the equivalent of the yoke's length? When it says the size of the yoke, he's talking about the length of the yoke or its width. So Omar lahu hahu mi Rabbanan Rabbi Yaakov Shmei. One of the rabbis, whose name was Rabbi Yaakov, said to them, "Ledidei mi partially mi minini de Rabbi Yochanan." For explain to me, Rabbi Yochanan, mishichas oil l'rachbar. It's pulling a yoke to distance equivalent to its width, which is a tefach. V'lema tefach. If so, let Rabbi Yochanan say tefach. It says let it pull a tefach. Why does he bother saying the size of a yoke? Haka mashmalon. This is what Rabbi Yochanan means to inform us by saying the word oil instead of tefach. Shiur de'ol tefach havei. The size of a yoke's width is a tefach. So why do you have to teach us that for? Lamai nafkamina. What's the difference? Lamikach umimkor. In regard to buying and selling a yoke. So if a person says, doesn't specify the size of the yoke and says, I want a yoke, and the guy brings him a yoke that's only a half a tefach thick, or a leash, he says, that's not what, when you talk about a yoke, it's understood that the minimum size of a yoke is a tefach, therefore that's not a good sale, and he can get his money back. So he's telling us more than one thing by saying what a yoke is.
They don't discuss material to make a...
Not here. Maybe somewhere else it does. You have a cow you want to lead around?
No, they have... I've been around. They're big.
Omar Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul, Mibnei Ma Omra Taurus Have Egla Benacha. Why did Torah say to bring a calf to the... it says to the valley, to the eastern valley? Why does it have to be done there? Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, Yovai Dover Shalo Osa Perus, let something, the calf that has not borne fruit, come, and it has to be less than a year old, V'yerach b'mokom she'ein osa perus, and be capitated at a place that does not produce fruit, because we said it could be a rocky place, you can't grow anything. V'chaper, and it should atone for al mi shelo inichu l'asros perus, for the murder of someone who is not allowed to bear fruit. So my parents, what is meant by the murdered person not having been allowed to bear fruit? If you say that it's talking about the fruit it's talking about is producing children. If you say that therefore you say that the murdered person was an elderly person or a castrated person, that's not possible to produce fruit, therefore they wouldn't bring an egla rufa. Is that what you're trying to say? This is not the case. We know that that's not the case. It doesn't matter what who the person was that was murdered. So therefore that fruit couldn't mean that. Ella mitzvahs, rather the fruit that it's talking about is referring to the mitzvahs. That this person can no longer produce fruit means the person can no longer do mitzvahs. It actually says like a pomegranate. It says it's 613 seeds. It represents mitzvahs. So there's a fruit that represents mitzvahs. And he bring the calf down to an Ason valley. The term Ason implies a literal meaning. It means hard. How do we know that Ason means hard? Ton Rabbanan, we learn in the Brisa, Minayin the Ason Jehu Kosher. From where do we learn that Ason means hard? Shnei Amar, Ason Mushavech V'sim Basela Kinech. Strong, Ason is your dwelling, and set in a rock is your nest. Ve'omer Shimu Horim es Riv Hashem Hoi Sonim Mosde Oretz. And Scripture also says, "Hear, O mountain, the controversy of Hashem, and the strong Asa ones, the foundations of the earth." So here, from those two ways, we can see that Asa means a hard or strong place. Achim or Mim, others say, "Minayin le'Ason shehu yoshan." From where do we derive that the term Asa means old? Could mean that as well. Shenemar goy Ason hu goy me'olam hu. For it says it is an Ason nation. It's a nation from the beginning of the world. It's an old nation, and that is in Yirmiyahu. The Mishnah also said, "Ve'orpin osa mikoivitz mecharea," and they decapitate the calf with a cleaver from the back of the neck. My timer, what's the reason? Gomar arifa mechatas ov. The Tana derives from a gzer shava between the word arifa that it says in regards to egel arufa and the arifa it says in regards to bird chatas. Remember, bird chatas is just malika. He does it through the back of the neck. So just like the bird chatas is done through the back of the neck, so too an egel arufa is performed at the back of its neck. Makarma osir milizroa umeleoved, and it's placed forever prohibited to be planted or worked. Tana Rabbanan, it said that in the Mishnah. Tana Rabbanan is to Rabbi's Tana Brisa Asher lo yove bo v'lo yizarea. The verse Eson Valley, in which no work be done in it, nor can it be planted. She'avar, this refers to in the past. The Torah disqualifies any because it says no work be done in it, nor can it be planted. So it sounds like in having worked in the past. The Torah disqualifies any site once it's something's been grown in it. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. These are the words of Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan Amar Lahaba is talking about the future, that no work, once you could use it before in the past, but once you've done the eglo roof in there, you can no longer use it again for a productive place. Other than we said for flax, combing flax, and chipping stones. Rabbi Amar in regard to the future, so he says, in regard to the future, everyone agrees that the Torah prohibits the land to be worked. It's written, nor can it be planted. In what? Because nor can it be planted. It's talking about in the future when it says planted. In regard to what do they argue? They argue regarding sha'avar in the past. Rabbi Yoshia Savar mi kasiv lo yubad. Rabbi Yoshia holds that the first part of the verse in which no work can be done in it refers to the past. For it's written, and it shall not be worked, which would clearly imply a command. For is it written? It says, is it written and it shall not be worked, which would mean command regarding the future? No, it says no work be done in it. Why did you use that lashon? Thus the clause could be understood to refer to the past. So Rabbi Yonasan but Rabbi Yonasan argues, is it written which has not been worked in the past? No, it just says no work to be done in it. So he understood that it should be understood to refer to the future and not in the past. Rabbi Shia Asher Sheavad Mashma. Rabbi Shia contends that the word which implies a reference to the past. It says the word which is this. But Rabbi Yonasan Asher Ribihu, and Rabbi Yoshan contends that the word which is a ribui and is written to learn something else from it, that all work is forbidden in the Eson, whether it's in the past or in the future. So that was in terms of the argument, whether it refers to the future or the past. But it's permitted to comb flax there and to chisel stones there. Tana Rabbanan is taught in the Brisa, Asher lo yove boy v'lo yizorah, and the verse says, in which no work be done in it, nor can it be planted. Ein lo elazariah. From this verse I know only that planting the soil of this place is forbidden. She'or avodas minayim. But from where do we derive that other forms of work are also forbidden? The Talmud Lomar Asher lo yavor bo. The verse says, in which no work be done in it. Mikol Mokum, implying that any work whatsoever. Im kein ma Talmud Lomar lo yizorah. If it says that you can't do work at all, why did it go ahead and say in the first part lo yizorah that shouldn't plant in it? Because planting is part of work. Why does the verse say specifically not to be planted? Lomar, to teach us to teach you that just as planting is distinctive and that it's performed in the land itself, so too all work that's performed in the land itself is forbidden. This excludes the prohibition of combing flax. There is not using the land, just using the space, the airspace, and the chiseling of stones. Again, I don't know whether you brought stones from elsewhere, or whether you don't consider stones part of the land, and there's not considered the land itself. The Ema Shaloya Boy Klal, but say that the word in which no work Bidanid is a generalization, a klal. V'lo yizora prat, and lo yizora, you shouldn't plant in it, is a prat. And we can learn out a klal prat, ein maklal elo masha prat. And we learn from a klal prat, you can't do anything more than what it says in the prat. And therefore, maybe it goes back to zroa, hey, ein minach minalo. Therefore, maybe it means that only refers to zriya, only refers to planting, and all other types of work you should be able to do. So the Gemara answers, we saw this is usher there. And we learned before that Asher Ribuyo. Asher is an inclusive means it adds everything, and you can't use a specification, a klal prat, when it has the word Asher there. So the Mishnah also says, Ziknei O'ir Rochatzin Yedein, the elders of the town would wash their hands there. And Tanarabbanan, the rabbis taught this in a brisa. The chol ziknei ha'ir ha'ik krovim el ha'cholol yirchatzu et yideihem ala egla harufa banachal. And all the elders of the town who are closest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the calf that was decapitated in the valley. She'ein tamad lomer harufa. Now, it was not necessary for the verse to say the calf that was decapitated, because we're already talking about this topic all along. So he added the word those words that was decapitated is extra. So ma tamad loim harufa. Why does it say that it was decapitated? Al makom arifason sha'agla, to teach that the washing of hands takes place at the site where the rufa decapitation of the calf occurred.
Good question. Do you think, since it's rocky, there'd be a source of water around? If there's a source of water, then it wouldn't be the definition of the land that it's supposed to be, because there's water there naturally. It would be.
So there's a mechloikas we said in the beginning. What the Eson Nachla Eson means. Some people means that there's a river, the dried riverbed. Maybe it's got a trickle going on, but the rest is a huge river. But somewhere gets dried out. You got a little trickle there, so bring the water from there. And the other one, I guess you'd have to bring water with you. It just means a rocky place. And they say our hands have not spilled this blood and our eyes do not see. Also, now did it enter your minds that the elders of the quarter actually did the killing? Obviously, it's not what it meant. Rather, it means that the murdered person did not come within our presence, and we didn't send him off without giving him food. And we did not see him and leave him and let him go his way without having an escort with him. So now we're going to talk about how important it is to giving a person an escort. There's a levaya. The levaya is a mace. That's where they get that from there too, with escorting the mace. But escorting even when a person is living, how important it is. Tanya, we learned that in Chumash when the Menachem visited Avram walked along with him to see them on their way. I think that's the first reference we have to person accompanying your guest. So Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Homa Rabbi Meir Amer, Kofin Levaya. We compel a person to escort his fellow from the city. Sheschar Halvoya Ein Lo Shir, for the reward for fulfilling the mitzvah of doing a Levaya is without a limit. Shenemar Veyiru Ashormim Ish Yotze Min Ha'ir, and the watchers saw a man leaving the city. V'yomer lo Harinu Na Es Mavoy Ha'ir V'asisa Imcha Chesed, and they said to him, show us now the approach to the city, and we shall deal kindly with you. This is talking about in Shoftim that was Ephraim and Manasseh, the tribes were taking part in the conquest of the land of Israel when they first came to Eretz Yisrael to conquer the land, and they had to capture the city of Beis El, and they couldn't find out where the entrance of the city was, and they asked the people to show us the approach to the city, and we will deal kindly with you with those people. And it's written, and he showed them the approach to the city. And what act of kindness did they do with him? So we're talking so now that they went and showed Ephraim and Manasseh that, so how did they get rewarded? The people who showed him, they took him along the way, they walked with him and showed him where the approach was. So what was their schar? What did Ephraim and Manasseh do with him? So it's what was the chesed did with him? The entire city that they went to, they killed by the sword. And the man and his family they left unharmed and sent him on his way. Okay, V'yelech ha'ish eretz. It's V'yelech and continues. V'yelech ha'ish eretz hachitim. It's talking about those people that they didn't kill. They went to the eretz hachitim of V'yiven Ir V'yikra Shmo Luz. And the man went to the land of the Chitim and he built a city and he called it Luz. V'hu Shmo Ad Hayom Hazeh. And its name is until this day.